He remembered his beloved nephew Dujun saying, "You know the truth that our country cannot avoid this crisis." He thought that Dujun also said, "This crisis will be different. Even if the strong economies lend us money, we cannot exchange it. If the whole continent only has $2 billion, it is like having a lot of food but no water. The result is that we will die of thirst, not hunger." Then the old chairman imagined himself dying of thirst in the desert. He was afraid of dying like that, so ugly. At that moment, he was shivering and imagining when there was a knock on the door. He calmly said, "Come in." Then his subordinates came in to prepare for the usual scolding. It was a familiar scene. Every time this chairman was about to scold his subordinates, they sat with their faces in front of the meeting table. Sure enough, the old man shouted, "Electronics production, announced to the whole department that from today, the export money will be kept in dollars. The money needed to pay will be taken from the loan." The subordinate hurriedly obeyed, "Yes, Chairman." The chairman continued, "As for construction, bid with foreign projects, 10% cheaper, 20%. In return, we have to get the deposit money, the intermediary money, as soon as possible." Another subordinate, probably in charge of construction, looked up and obeyed, "Yes, Chairman." Now, the chairman talked about insurance. He said, "Withdraw all investments in financial products abroad, no matter how much money we violate the contract. We have to cancel all transactions to insure the amount of dollars." The insurance manager said quickly, "Chairman, that will cause a huge loss. The revenue and expenditure of business." The chairman angrily shouted, "Shut up and withdraw." At this time, the finance insurance construction BCDXYZ guys did not dare to look up and say a word. The secretary usually just stood silently on one side. But because he had to poke his nose in everything, he still bravely opened his mouth and said, "Chairman, please calm down. I have prepared everything carefully. I am now controlling the foreign exchange of the subsidiaries." But the chairman said, "Careful preparation is not enough. You have to prepare with the determination that you might lose your arm or leg." The secretary was scared and asked, "Chairman, did he try to talk to the owner of Fantasy?" He suddenly mentioned that company and made the chairman even more furious. He only answered with one word after the secretary mentioned that company and made the chairman angry. The atmosphere was like being in hell. The secretary and the other subordinates silently thought that it was because the negotiation failed. They did not get the rope of $1 billion lowered down. The secretary still stubbornly asked, "Did they refuse?" The chairman replied, "Even in the 6-2 war, I made money. I was not afraid of war like now." His face gradually became annoyed. He said, "Now I feel afraid." The secretary also felt scared when he heard that. He was the chairman, and he was afraid, let alone me. The gang downstairs were also there, wondering if they would have any bread to eat in the future. The chairman continued, "One who holds many dollars, one who cannot die when standing next to me, even threatens me. For the first time, someone is more cruel than me." The old man suddenly felt afraid. True that there is always someone worse than you. The secretary on one side also started to guess, who was the owner of Fantasy, who made the chairman admit that he was more cruel than him. At that time, the chairman shouted at all his employees, "All of you be determined." On November 19, 1997, Ninja Huyn was appointed as Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance and Economy. He affirmed, "Strong and will solve the current crisis without needing the IMF." But 2 days later at 10 p.m. on the 21st, he held an urgent press conference stating that this was a request from the IMF and asked for assistance and improvement of the international balance of payments, stabilization of currency value, liberalization of trade, opening of the capital market, and increasing transparency in corporate management. The next day he read a special statement to the public about the president's request for assistance. This was the beginning of the IMF. The national credit rating of South Korea dropped and the composite stock index also lost 400 points. 9 large financial companies stopped operating and the PESA Group went bankrupt. Then another beautiful day Wai Chang as usual at Sehun's building. Sehun was annoyed and said to the other side of the phone, "Chairman, it's not like we pay after merging. Look at the contract carefully. The negotiation deadline is until February next year. It's still a long time." The other side said something that made Sehun exclaim, "What? Why pay in dollars? We will pay 1.2 trillion won in won. You just know that." Then he angrily slammed his phone on his desk. Dujun asked if it was Che Bank or not. Sehun replied, "Yes, not only that bank but every other bank is also in chaos. How about your nephew? Is Chairman Jean still considering it?" Dujun calmly said, "Yes, maybe he won't rush because of his grandson." "That's cruel." Sehun also laughed, "If he doesn't do that, he won't be a tycoon. You are also like that but only inferior to him in cunning ways to drain your grandfather's assets. But what if the exchange rate rises to 2001? How do you plan?" Dujun replied, "Then it's even better. 3,000 billion will become 5,000 billion. Sehun rested his chin and asked, "That's why I say you are a capitalist with 5,000 billion won in your hands. At age 20 how do you feel?" Dujun still smiled and replied, "Don't push me. I also want to hold that money and play some upper-class games in Europe until I go crazy." Sehun heard that and was surprised and asked, "If you like it then just play." But Dujun said, "Between a chairman of a group holding a country and a European family with a lot of money, which one is better? This old man doesn't have money so he doesn't know." So he answered, "You are a tasteless kid." Dujun smiled and said, "Uncle, wait a little longer and I will become the chairman of the Korean conglomerate and help you enjoy your retirement like a European noble." The old uncle heard that and obeyed. Waiting to get money from this kid would be fun, right? Then, at the Sun Yen Group in the afternoon, a warm figure was bowing his head and saying to the chairman, "Yes sir, I will definitely win and repay this favor." The chairman was annoyed and said, "Stop flattering me and keep those $2 billion for me." Then, the subordinate hurriedly left the gloomy room of the chairman. The chairman was tired and closed his eyes to rest for a while. The secretary's grandfather saw this scene and thought he would not let the old man rest. He wanted to say something. Then, the secretary asked the chairman, "Can you tell me who the owner of Fantasy is? I will meet him and negotiate with him." The chairman dismissed him, "I will arrange with them. You just go to visit the opposition party. Bring some tonic bottles and say the main point. If they support us with $2 billion first, the Korean Industrial Federation will cooperate actively with the next government." The secretary knew he could not get anything from the old chairman and reluctantly stomped his foot. Then he turned around and went to do his task. The chairman sighed. The chairman has been busy since then and now he can finally be quiet for a while. He looked at the black document on his desk. Then he picked up a paper contract and read it. It said 17.7%. The old man thought that the most influential person in the country could bring Sun Yen Motors 17.7% of influence. It was not just getting $1 billion but getting it with a condition of exchanging money. The kid said, "After merging, I will return it to Sun Yen but there is no such thing. He is someone who keeps everything in his pocket and never gives it back." The old man was angry and threw the paper back on the table. He often thought, "I can't continue if I divide it equally for 5 children. Each one gets 20%. Moreover, I ignore my son and give it directly to my grandson but he is also qualified anyway." Looking at that kid many times I thought I was looking in a mirror. I knew the joy of stealing from others. Once I had it in my hand, I never let it go. For Dujun, 17.7% was not the end but only the beginning. A child born with a personality that values calculation more than bloodline. And he aimed at Sun Yan, then the other children and grandchildren would be kicked out. The old man began to worry when he thought about this grandson. He knew that of course he would help Sun Yan grow stronger and become a solid fortress, but he would never let anyone else enter that fortress. Anyway, he had a deep heart when he cared for his father so much. He was young but still helped his father realize his dream. The old man thought more about this kid and felt more uncomfortable, but he thought, now is not the time to think about that. I had to worry about the group instead of worrying about my son. He sighed and thought, even if I was robbed, I had to console myself that the robber was my grandson, not an outsider. Then, the old chairman sat alone in his room. At the beginning of this chapter we return to a familiar building in Sihun. Sihun said these were reliable companies. As long as they passed these companies there would be nothing. Dujun received a document from uncle, then asked if sister calculated then which company had the highest possibility. Uncle answered of course company at top of list, good technique, so high profit, not intend to eat big bite, right correct or not? Dujun answered of course sir. After that, Dujun started to examine the documents that his uncle gave him. The old uncle also took out a paper and wrote down the necessary documents. Then Uncle Sihun asked, but will the construction collapse? They have a lot of money for internal reservations and international orders. Dujun asked back, don't you believe me, uncle? Right now, only Sun Yan and A Hyun can overcome this crisis in our country. The rest are just oil lamps in the wind. The uncle was still adamant. Even so, if the construction gets support from the government, they can still resist. Dujun thought that this uncle was too stubborn and deaf to reason, so he just smiled. Then he knew that this old man had ears of wood, so he stood up and said to wait and see. Uncle Sihun was angry and didn't know what to wait and see. Then Dujun left by himself. He went down to the parking lot, got into the car and said, Assistant Kim, wait for me at the chairman's house. Assistant Kim hurriedly stepped on the gas and drove out of the parking lot. Then the car drove out onto the wide highway. At this time, Dujun thought that Sihun's opinion was obvious because the construction was a strong company. And if that company wasn't strong, he wouldn't need to investigate it. After the IMS crisis in 1997, Korea would enter a period of big fish eating small fish. Carnivores coexisted with herbivores on the savannah. There, carnivores could hardly hide their identity, but from now on it would be the era of the jungle, where there were only a few carnivores who were not garlic but dared to show their tiger teeth and claws. And if he was determined to become the king of that place, he had to act fast. At this time, Assistant Kim spoke up. Young master, based on the content I have grasped in the past and the information that Team Leader XIN collected, we can conclude that the Hansung newspaper has sent someone to follow you. Dujun heard that and asked, Is Hansung newspaper an ally with my family? Assistant Kim answered, Yes, it is. Dujun was stunned and thought, what a surprising result. I thought it was domestic. It turned out that there were already outsiders who were drooling over it. At this time, Assistant Kim continued. Actually, I had already found out since this morning, but I was afraid that they might be allies, so I wanted to be more careful and reported late. Moreover, the chairman also knew about the information beforehand and security had reported it to him. He said he had received an order to pretend not to know, so I was even more sure. Hearing Assistant Kim's report made Dujun very surprised. He remembered the chairman and realized that he knew but pretended not to know. What was his intention? He thought. Even if Hansung newspaper acted, it was not a type worth caring about, or he was being cautious with them as allies. I have to learn from every small decision of his. He judged and applied those small things. It was strategy and tactics. While Dujun was thinking, the car had also arrived outside of the mansion. Because he was the richest in Korea, this house looked like an airport. The car had to run for almost 10 kilometers before it could get in. When he got to the chairman's house, Dujun gave Assistant Kim a card and said, "Today you use this card to treat the staff in the strategy team." When Assistant Kim thanked him, Dujun also told him not to worry about money and just buy the most expensive things. Assistant Kim was overjoyed and thanked the young master. Dujun got out of the car and slammed the door hard. He felt happy and thought that this time he had to use his sister-in-law's card to his heart's content. Then he went into the house and the chairman asked him, "What do you think?" "I think that's enough." He took the folder that the chairman gave him and opened it. On it was a number, 17.7%. Dujun calculated silently, 17.7% of Sun Yen Group plus 8 companies of Achin Group is 1. After merging those companies, they would be mine. Then he pretended to ask him, "Sir, is the daily number just a transaction or an inheritance?" This annoyed the old man. But then the chairman laughed and said, "How ambitious are you, kid? Inheritance? Do I have to share my inheritance with you?" "I only share it with my children." Dujun naively answered, "Because my father is not a tycoon." But he was also a little hopeful. But the old chairman cunningly replied, "That's your problem." Dujun thought to himself, he said he would share his inheritance with his children, which means he would give some to my father. At this point, the chairman said, "This is the second and final offer. Hurry up and stamp it and transfer $1 billion to me." Dujun calculated that he should not bargain anymore. If he talked about something else, he might get hurt. A small stone can create a wave in a big lake. No matter how much he loved him, if he disappointed him once, the thin layer of ice would break. He must not make a mistake that would break the ice. Thinking so, Dujun replied, "Yes, I will prepare $1 billion at the exchange rate of 1.6 won." The old man was so surprised that he asked again, 1.6 won? Dujun asked, "Why are you surprised?" He thought you would bother him more. The chairman was dumbfounded, amazed, and looked at his grandson who suddenly became so filial. Dujun continued, "I will always stand by your side. You have compromised so much, so I should not be too greedy." The chairman heard his unfilial grandson say that and did not believe it. He smiled and then asked again, "What are you plotting now?" But Dujun looked surprised and said, "What do you mean?" The chairman answered, "Do you think I'm easily fooled by your sweet words?" Dujun looked at him and thought, he is a person who never loses his guard. He said the deal was over. Today it is 8 billion. The price is 1,342 trillion won. I said I would transfer the money to you, at the exchange rate of 1.6 won, then how can there be a bargain? The old chairman replied. The exchange rate could exceed 2,000 won. If your $1 billion falls into my hands, then you will suffer a heavy loss. Dujun thought to himself, I have to check the predictive ability of the Sun Yen Economic Research Institute. Could it be true that he has taken over all the talents? Thinking so, he pretended to ask, will the exchange rate really reach 2.0001? The old chairman replied. More than 90% will be around 2,201. This is the prediction of the doctors of the Research Institute. They are not always right, but sometimes they hit the mark. Dujun was a little surprised when he heard him say such a large amount of money. Then the chairman asked again, are you sorry? Because the exchange rate could rise to 2,001? But Dujun answered, I told you before that it could exceed 2,001. But I don't regret it at all. I'm your grandson and I'm not a stingy person. Why would I want to see you lose? At this point, the chairman replied, I know you're not stingy, but you're also not someone who likes to lose. The chairman asked impatiently, don't beat around the bush anymore. What's the additional condition? Dujun thought he was sure of it. Pretending would only increase his feelings. So he said, I want to ask you 2 things. The chairman smiled happily, that's right, don't say it. Let's see if that condition will be enough to compensate for the loss or bring you a big profit. At this point, Dujun put his hand in his pocket and took something out. What he took out was a piece of paper. Then he placed it on the table in front of the chairman. The chairman looked at the paper he had just put on the table and was very surprised. Dujun said, "This is not a map of Seoul." "Yes, sir, look at the red circles." The chairman wondered, "What are these places?" Dujun answered, "The land in the middle belongs to the city of Seoul. I want to buy these lands cheaply." The old man asked in confusion, "Do you want me to pressure the mayor of Seoul?" Dujun replied, "No, sir." He continued, "The current mayor's term is only 6 months left. We have to ask the next mayor, right?" The chairman was shocked. Could he be hinting at his uncle? He heard Dujun nod and say, "Yes." He immediately said, "No way." Dujun still said, "I will support your uncle's election campaign. If he becomes the mayor, he will sell the public lands back to us. And you will pressure the members of parliament to buy them." The chairman was annoyed and shouted, "We might not need to threaten the members of parliament, you know. I already said no, what else do you want?" But Dujun kept talking. "We will gain reputation in the national economic crisis. If Seoul sells all its non-business lands to raise funds, the public opinion will surely not oppose." The chairman was getting angrier. He clenched his teeth and yelled at his nephew. But the unfilial nephew still asked, "Can you tell me why you are so opposed to this?" He answered, "Because that guy is not from the Jin family but from the Choi family." Dujun could not find a reason for that. Then, the two of them froze and stared at each other for a few seconds. Dujun spoke again. "The mayor of Seoul cannot have a big impact on Sunyen Group. But you said that your son-in-law Choi's involvement in politics was your wife's idea. He is nothing but your wife's puppet." Dujun thought. Because Jean Seo Jun is only a daughter, she wants to use political power to fill that gap. He realized his scheme. If her husband becomes a powerful politician, even without a microscope she can check all the legal actions and plots of Sunyen. If she uses that power to make a fuss, it will surely cause chaos. He realized that Seo Jun would use that power to demand a share equal to or greater than her brother's. Dujun asked, "Why don't you think about turning her and your uncle into puppets of Sunyen? They will clean up everything dirty and shameful. Until they sit on the mayor's seat of Seoul, if they do that they are nothing but puppets anyway." The chairman replied, "But the dirt came from Sunyen. If it is exposed, Sunyen will be ruined too." Dujun said, "I will take care of everything. That way, I will have the power of aunt and uncle. You don't have to worry too much." The chairman was very surprised and said, "What?" But Dujun interrupted him and continued, "I will provide money whenever you need it. Just use it." The old man was annoyed by his unfilial grandson who did not listen to him. He said, "If you provide money, I just need to support you. Why do you need my approval?" But when he heard him say that, Dujun smiled mysteriously because he knew that if he called the leader of the ruling party, Uncle would have no chance to be nominated. The chairman was very surprised and did not understand how this kid knew so much. Then Dujun suddenly raised 2 fingers in front of the old man. He said further, "Just 2 times, please agree to let Uncle be the mayor of Seoul for 8 years. During that time, you just need to take care of the necessary things, right? What do you think, Chairman?" When he saw the 2 fingers of this kid, he crossed his arms and asked, "What is the second thing?" Dujun heard that and asked, "Do you agree?" But the chairman insisted on asking, "Tell me the second thing first." Dujun looked at the old man for a while and then decided to say, "Build DA." The chairman was puzzled, "Why do you suddenly bring up another company?" But Dujun explained, "You have to block the government funding that flows into Build DA." He was very surprised when he heard the name Build DA. At this time, Dujun said further, "You can't get the land to make a parking lot. You have to build something on that land, right? To do that, you need at least a small construction company, don't you?" The chairman was angry and asked, "Do you think Build DA is a kiosk?" Build DA is the 5th company in the contractor list. But Dujun said, "Sir, I am the chairman of a kin group in Sunyan Motor. Compared to them, Build DA is just a kiosk." The chairman was still silent and listened to Dujun from beginning to end. After listening, he smiled mysteriously. Then the chairman said, "Dujun, you are really determined." Dujun was confused about what he was determined about. The chairman continued, "It's because you want to show everyone that you will start your own company. You don't want to inherit Sunyan Construction but think about buying it back?" Dujun heard that and asked, "If my father asks for it, will you give it to me?" The chairman pretended to say that he might or might not. Dujun looked at the old man with dislike and thought, "Don't fool me. You say that to annoy me, don't you?" Then the chairman started to think about Build DA. Dujun continued, "No business can escape the current foreign exchange crisis. Build DA must be desperate for dollars. Just block the government support and they will go bankrupt. Then I will pick them up." The chairman had to turn his head and look at his precious grandson. Then he said, "DA is a sick company that can recover with a blood transfusion. So DA and your Uncle Choi's former sole mayor are in cahoots." Dujun did not hesitate to answer that if Uncle provides blood and Aunt provides fertilizer, then flowers will bloom. After seeing Build DA bloom, the chairman was still silent. "I listened to what my nephew said." Dujun continued to speak. After the merger, he would bring in the name Sunyan. The chairman was very surprised when he heard the name of his group. Then he changed from annoyed to happy and said, "That makes me happy to hear. Do you know that in this family, the only person who increased the number of subsidiaries for Cho Sunyan besides me is you?" Dujun felt a chill when he heard the old man say that. He thought to himself, "What is that? It doesn't feel good at all. That smile is not a smile that shows happiness." The chairman continued, "I will think about those two things. And the agreement between us is over, right? Then hurry up, even the directors are wavering. You have to quickly put in $1 billion to calm them down." Then Dujun replied, "Then I will do as you say." Then he bowed and walked out of the meeting room step by step. As he walked, he felt a strange coldness on his back. "I don't know what it is." The old chairman stood behind and stared at Dujun leaving. The more he looked, the more strange he felt. The mayor of Seoul was the one who would cooperate to overcome the economic crisis of the country. Selling public land to prepare for support was a good thing. After personally building a mayor like that and taking over that land, even buying the construction company to use as a tool to turn that land into money, it was a beautiful picture. To complete the beautiful picture, someone even agreed to distribute hundreds of billions of dollars at a cheap price for the exchange rate to skyrocket. Doesn't that mean that kid is confident enough to pull out hundreds of billions? The chairman looked at his palm as he thought. He must have known the palm reading right after hearing Dujun's explanation. I tried to suppress that idea immediately with him. Anyway, this is something I can't easily lend him strength. The old man clenched his hand and thought further. And I felt fear again under that cute and handsome face, hiding the personality of the most vicious beast. If he wanted to attach Sunyan's name to a kin and DA, he would surely take over Sunyan Motor and build Sunyan. The old chairman thought and felt very sad. He walked the weak steps of old age and pondered. There was one strange thing that compared to the children who only wanted to receive things from me, I felt especially proud of the grandson who wanted to take things from me. The next day was another warm sunny day at Dujun's house. A panicked voice rang out, 40 billion? You're right about flattering him. If you pay 3 billion for the special party fee and about 5 billion for the party leaders. And campaigning will cost about 30 billion, so you need about 40 billion left? Hearing that, Dujun pretended to be dumbfounded and thought to himself, 40 billion is not the name of a dog in your house, right? How can you be so ignorant of the times and need such a large amount of money? And you just say it casually without discussing any details? He pretended to be innocent and surprised and said, "That's a lot of money, Auntie." "Why are you so surprised? Don't you have that much money?" The aunt hurriedly said, "I can prepare 15 billion. You just need to prepare 25 billion, okay?" Dujun immediately replied, "Yes, that's fine." The aunt happily said, "I can't withdraw 15 billion at once. You have to pay the special party fee at the beginning of next year, so prepare 3 billion in advance." Dujun thought to himself, this is how the brains of those tycoons work. Don't they understand the times? How can they ask for tens of billions from a 20-year-old nephew like that? But out loud, he still answered, "Yes, I will prepare it as soon as possible." Then Dujun said, "Shouldn't we write a contract?" The couple heard that and were shocked. "Contract? What contract?" Dujun answered, "This amount of money has no invoice, so at least we should have a contract, right?" The aunt heard her nephew say that and looked at each other in confusion. Then the uncle said, "You are still young, so you don't know that there is no one who sends money for election contracts outside." The aunt also chimed in, "It must be because our nephew only deals with new investors. This money will disappear and not be used for investment." Dujun pretended to laugh, but thought to himself, "So you think I'm a rich kid, right?" He innocently said, "I should have explained it clearly, but I forgot. Please wait a moment and someone will explain it to you." The couple heard that and looked at each other in confusion, not knowing what to explain. At this time, Dujun looked behind him and shouted, "Uncle, come out here." At this time, the aunts and uncles did not know who the uncle was. From the stairs, a man came down. Sihun appeared and said, "Nice to meet you too." Dujun looked at this scene and laughed happily. The next day at the familiar building where Sihun worked, Sihun rubbed his sore neck and said, "She's not easy either." Unlike her appearance when she borrowed money from her nephew, as soon as she realized that this was a business deal, her face changed immediately. Then he remembered the aunt's angry face. Dujun smiled and said, "Anyway, she's still your grandfather's flesh and blood." Sihun also said, "I don't know when you plan to use this contract, but you have to wait until I retire and go abroad or else you'll go to jail." Dujun took the contract and said, "This contract cannot be made public." Sihun pointed at Dujun. The new villain had already known that the bomb in his body would give him power. But Dujun said no. "I intend to give it to my grandfather." Sihun was very surprised to hear this answer. He shouted, "Are you crazy? How can you give that contract? It's like giving your neck to the chairman." Dujun said he didn't care about business. He always just held the business owner's hand. This contract would be used as an exchange so that she wouldn't dare to have any other intentions. He had to make sure that his uncle couldn't escape from his grandfather's hand before he agreed to let his uncle run for mayor of Seoul. Sihun had a headache and said, "Your grandfather is really cunning. He doesn't trust his own children. By the way, I want to ask you something. 17.7% is the controlling stake in Sunyen that you have. At least you have to have 80% of the shares in your hand to become the chairman of Sunyen. 80% is just that. If you like it, maybe you won't get 10% of the shares that the chairman intends to leave for you." Dujun replied, "Nothing." Sihun was surprised and asked, "What?" Dujun said firmly, "You may also know that besides me, no one in Sunyen can be an executive director. But he is inherently selfish. Of course he won't give his things to anyone when he dies. If they were put in a coffin by the group, he would probably do that too." Sihun asked again, "You don't ask because of the chairman's ambition?" You know his true thoughts, but Dujun was indifferent and said, "I don't know either. When feelings and reason fight, reason doesn't always win." Sihun didn't believe it, but Dujun answered that he didn't care about his appearance. He intended to see the shares he gave as a reward. Even though this reward was a bit too much. He thought of his grandfather and thought that his grandson was not ambitious but had outstanding abilities. He didn't care about assets even though he was promised to give them. Surely this was the way, but he got the most rewards. Then he looked at the document in his hand and continued, anyway, this contract will play a very big role. Dujun calculated in his mind that he had finished step 1 and was about to move on to step 2. Then he asked, Uncle, Sun Yen has already exchanged $1 billion out of the total $3.2 billion, right? We still have $2.2 billion left, don't we, Oxyhun? Sihun was startled and asked, why? Don't you want to use the $2.2 billion? Dujun answered, of course I do. We have to exchange them as soon as possible, because after the presidential election is over, the government will change immediately. I plan to give that money as a congratulatory gift for their victory. Sihun was very surprised and asked, what? He shouted, what are you thinking? Are you trying to imitate those tycoons? Dujun replied, what's the point of building Media City? No one will migrate to that city. Sihun didn't understand much about migration, but Dujun explained that we will attract famous companies that are suitable for Media City. For example, television stations. Sihun said loudly, television is too ambitious, but Dujun just smiled and said, there are both broadcast and cable television. We have to do it gradually. Sihun could only keep quiet and listen to this kid's calculations. Dujun continued, from the government's perspective, the SMC project is not bad either. Building new infrastructure not only helps with recruitment but also stimulates the economy. The business situation of the new government seems reasonable. Sihun heard that and asked, so you intend to throw $2.2 billion at them? Are you crazy? Dujun was surprised and answered, no way. Why would I give my money to the government? The government has to exchange dollars for me. Sihun then realized that it was also within the public land of Seoul. Dujun smiled and said, yes, everything is in one package. He continued, South Korea is short of dollars. If tomorrow there is an investment company that brings $2.2 billion and invests in building media infrastructure, it will be enough to make everyone applaud. Sihun also said, if the Seoul city government cooperates and expands the business, they might even get a budget from the central government. Dujun was even happier and said, that would be perfect. Suddenly Sihun looked at the kid with a puzzled expression and then asked, are you a copy of your grandfather? What do you think so far? Dujun pretended to be a good person and answered, no way. Everything comes from my filial piety. Sihun almost vomited and said, what nonsense are you talking about? Where is the filial piety? Dujun laughed and said, after turning SMC into a media empire, I will give it to my father. Sihun suddenly stood up and looked at the kid without saying a word. Dujun also stood up. He said that besides film production, television content production, cable television, there was also internet business. He said that his father was also the son of the chairman of Sun Yen Group and had to do all that to be worthy. Sihun had been shocked all this time and couldn't say anything. Dujun said again, besides, fantasy in America has a close relationship with big companies, right? If we connect well, we might create a global media company. At this time, the chairman was studying a paper. He wore glasses and squinted his eyes to read every word on the paper without missing anything. Then he said, so this is what we got. Dujun nodded and continued, to the point that uncle won't be able to oppose what you say even if he becomes the mayor of Seoul, because if this contract is made public he will have to go to court for violating the law on political funds and his career will be ruined. The old man took off his glasses and asked, do you only want to borrow public land? Dujun obediently answered, yes, you can take the rest of the land. He felt great when he signed the contract. The old man was surprised and asked him why. Dujun Van knew the value of the public land immediately. He told him not to dream of using some election money to exchange for all the public land. The chairman asked, "Then how about I take it all and give you a little bit?" Dujun knew he had succeeded. He had agreed to take it all, but he pretended to be reluctant and said, "No, thank you. My hobby is not making money from building apartments." The old man said something sarcastic. "Even if your son-in-law Troy participates in the election, he may not win." Dujun replied, "His chances of winning have increased now because you have thought positively." The chairman looked at his smart, rich, and scheming grandson and said, "I can't beat your cleverness." Dujun smiled secretly. He wondered who would be his uncle's target, but that person would be pitiful. Sun Yan's information team would dig up his entire past. If they found a speck of dust, all the media would explode. He would have no ability to resist. The chairman continued, "All right, you have used a lot of money to help me get the mayor of Seoul. I can't stand still either. I will also use some power when the election happens." Dujun bowed his head and thanked his grandfather. The chairman looked at his handsome grandson who had built his own business after the election and thought, "He gave me the mayor of Seoul, but was this a hint that I was too greedy when I took his achievements?" Thinking that, he said, "Why do you look regretful over there?" Dujun pretended not to care and said, "No, I don't." The old man smiled and said, "Don't be angry. I will also give you a gift. If you want me to do anything for you, just say it." Dujun heard that and said, "You are planning to build a new business after the election. I will talk to you about it." The old man asked, "A business that needs the power of the government? That sounds impressive. You remember to be careful of those politicians who participate. They will cause a lot of variables. Their interests are more complicated than ours. They are not the kind who want to be helped. What they want is everything to be smooth even if they are sprinkled with pepper powder." Dujun was incredulous. Could he be giving him advice or was he just saying that? He stood up and said, "I will consult with you after I finish the plan. Then I hope you can judge for me. If you stop me, I will stop." As soon as he said that, he was pleased and thought to himself that this must be the answer he wanted. But the old man said, "You build your business with your own money. Why do you need my approval? Even if you fail, try it once. It will be a good lesson for you." He said that maliciously and then suddenly smiled kindly. It was hard to believe. Dujun looked at his grandfather and thought that he still couldn't know what was hidden behind his eyes and words. On the morning of December 19th, all the media channels reported that Kim Jong-tre, the candidate of the new People's Assembly of South Korea, had become the new president. He had collaborated with Han Hee-jin of Chibi Group and Park Imp of the Democratic Party. The next day, at a cheap pub that had appeared in this novel, where there were many ordinary people smoking cheap cigarettes instead of tycoons, a friend asked Dujun, "Do you still remember your promise to treat us after the exam?" Dujun replied, I know. The friend then asked cheerfully, "Let's order something." Dujun asked, "What do you want to eat?" Another friend said, "Hey Dujun, you have never been to a place like this. Just order whatever you want." The other one realized that it was true, but they didn't know what to order in places like this. Of course, Dujun has been here hundreds of times. Dujun remembered his previous life when he often didn't have money to order snacks. He thought he should let these guys taste what he had always wanted to eat but couldn't afford. He then called the waitress and asked her to bring beer for everyone. The waitress and his friend were stunned. But Dujun continued, "We don't drink often, so we have to drink something good. Otherwise, I will be called stingy." His three friends looked at each other in surprise. Then one of them stood up and shouted, "Hey Dujun is going to buy bottled beer. Don't act like it's your first time. The whole pub is looking at us." The rich people also looked at Dujun in surprise. Dujun just smiled and thought, "When I was a freshman, I only dared to drink draft beer. bottled beer was too expensive. He then asked the waitress for some snacks. He ordered a portion of sausage stir-fried with vegetables, spicy snail salad with noodles, and a portion of mintai fish. One friend asked for chicken as well. Dujun agreed and asked if he wanted seasoned chicken or fried chicken. He then ordered another portion of fried chicken for his friends. At this point, everyone looked at him attentively and asked if he had ever been to a place like this. And Zhang knew well that he was the third generation of a wealthy family, and yet he came to a cheap pub. It was unbelievable. Dujun thought to himself and suddenly felt curious. I wonder if my cousins have ever been to a cheap pub like this. I wonder if they have ever ordered a pot of fish cake soup at a liquor store and sipped soju. Dujun finished thinking and said, I often come to places like this. My family usually goes to Gadadaji to eat skewers. My cousins and I often drink soju with a pot of steaming fish cake soup. Do you think my family always goes to expensive restaurants or eateries? When we eat at home, we don't have a banquet table with 12 dishes. We just eat soup, stew and side dishes. There is nothing special about it. He thought to himself. Basically, I am an ordinary person, so of course I can get along with ordinary people. I have to take this opportunity to shake off the image of being the third generation of a wealthy family. They all heard him say that and smiled at each other. At this moment, one of them suddenly bowed his head and said, Hello, senior. So they all looked surprised when they saw who it was behind him. The senior said, Sorry for interrupting you guys with these seniors who are about to graduate. Dujun politely stood up and said, No problem, sir. Then the senior asked, Dujun, I have something to ask you. I came here on purpose today. Can I ask you? Dujun answered friendly, Yes sir, please go ahead. He said that the three of them had applied for a job at a financial company that went bankrupt. The other two companies canceled their offers. They said it was hard to hire new employees this year. His friends were speechless when they heard that. The senior quickly added, Don't misunderstand, I'm not asking you to apply for me. You know more than us about this situation, right? You have access to a lot of high-level information that we have to study again to apply. But if the situation is still like this next year, I will change my direction. I have to prepare for the judicial exam or the civil service exam. Dujun sat upright and thought, while his friends looked at him as if they were waiting for him to say something. Dujun had a headache and didn't know what to say. Should he tell them the truth or comfort them with a few words? He pretended to drink some water to think more. He thought that even if he told these kids what would happen in the future, they wouldn't feel the reality. Then Dujun put down the glass and exhaled. He said, My advice is that you should give up your dream of applying and prepare for the judicial or administrative exam. The senior stubbornly asked, Is the job market still bad next year because of the IMF? Dujun remembered and thought. It will be hard from now on. Applying would become more and more difficult. Even Seoul University was no exception. So he said, Everyone who is working will be laid off. There will be a wave of layoffs with the reason for corporate restructuring. The senior and the kids around him panicked when they heard the word layoff. Dujun continued, The big companies will cut at least 30%. The IMF crisis is not just a lack of liquidity. He gently added, Our country is in a state of economic bankruptcy. The guys who only know how to drink and have fun are worried about their future. The senior also fell into silence because he was old. Dujun said again, There is no concept of a lifetime job anymore. The company can fire any employee. And there will be a new term called non-regular employee. A friend asked curiously, What is a non-regular employee? Dujun didn't know how to explain the concept of non-regular employees in modern times in his previous life. Another friend asked, Should we reduce taxes like income tax and personal income tax for part-time employees? Dujun looked at the senior and asked, What about pension? But he didn't have any pension as a part-time worker. Dujun asked again, what if the boss says you have to quit tomorrow? The senior calmly answered, then I have to quit. Hearing that, Dujun nodded and said, that's right, that's a non-regular employee. This form is not only in trading places but also in big companies. Hearing him say that, the senior was stunned and didn't know what to say. The friends who were drinking and having fun also became pale because they were worried about their future. Dujun calmly said, from now until the country gets out of bankruptcy and the economy returns to normal, it will take a lot of time. If you don't prepare for public service exams and only want to apply for jobs, you should enlist first. At least you can delay your graduation and avoid the storm. Hearing that, they all felt like they were hit by a storm. The people who sat next to them also sneered because they didn't know who he was and why he was preaching. But his friends who knew he was from a wealthy family were scared out of their minds. Dujun looked and thought. This matter would not directly affect the kids who were about to finish their first year. But from next year, when the wave of layoffs rose and the people around them became victims of the IMF, they would understand why he said they should avoid the rain. At this time, his senior spoke up. Thanks to you, I'm more sober now. Thank you. He looked at the main character with a grateful and affectionate gaze. Dujun thought to himself. Nam too was really different. Then he said, no, maybe my words were too negative. It's because the people who run the companies around me always think of the worst case scenario. At this time, his senior raised his beer glass and said, we should think of the worst case scenario to prepare. It's also time to graduate. It's because of us that the atmosphere is so gloomy. Sorry guys, let's drink now. Then he raised his glass high and said, you guys still have a lot of time. You guys will have enough time to avoid the rain and prepare well. Don't worry about anything today. Let's drink up. These guys were happy to hear about drinking beer. They laughed happily and eagerly. Dujun thought in his stomach that even though it was a forced smile, it also helped to stir up the atmosphere. Whether it was stirred up or not, just look at these two grandfathers smiling with their teeth. Then they all raised their glasses and went to toast from this table to another table. No one noticed the door of the shop being opened. Dujun was the stinkiest kid in the story and he didn't know this either. A pair of feet wearing Nike shoes stepped into the shop. The person said, Dujun, it's been a long time since I saw you. He was startled and saw that it was a beautiful girl. Dujun didn't know what to say because he didn't know her name. The girl pointed at his face and said, don't tell me you forgot my name already. Lucky me. At this time, his senior shouted, Min Young, what are you doing here? Dujun heard that and then started to remember that he lived 2 lives, so he remembered a bit later. That's right, this girl's name was Xiao Ming Young. Then she sat down and grabbed a glass and pretended to be a girl from home. She said, just give me half a glass. I still have to go to the library. Dujun sat opposite her and looked at her with admiration. At this time, his senior said, you're preparing for the judicial exam. You're really different. You didn't attend the graduation ceremony, you didn't take a summer break, but you buried yourself in studying. But how do you have time to come here? Min Young replied, I think that you seniors also don't have time to sit and play here. It probably only takes about 2 years to prepare for the administrative exam, right? But for the judicial exam, this is not something that everyone can be sure of, so everyone will evaluate themselves. Dujun was confused. What was she talking about? Was it related to IMS? Another senior asked suddenly, what are you talking about? Min Young answered, isn't it because of you seniors that I came here to confirm with Dujun how the situation of the companies is? How long will the terrible foreign exchange crisis last? Isn't that right? Dujun did not say anything but just thought that it was not bad. He heard from his seniors that he thought the girl was just a model student who buried herself in studying and dreamed of becoming a judge. But it turned out that she knew how the world was working. After saying that, Min Young took a glass of beer and drank it all in one gulp. Then she slammed the glass on the table and said, I heard that even the label of Seoul University is not enough to find a job outside. The cold wind is blowing. All the graduates are crying. That cold wind will not disappear easily, but we are still lucky. We studied law, so the civil service exam is not too hard. Dujun was confused and thought, why does this girl talk like my friend Chan? His senior asked, are you two dating? While dating, will they talk about things like the Korean economy? At this time, a girl crazy guy stood up hastily and said, it can't be like this. Dujun is not from Earth. Min Young can't date an alien. Min Young said, you are not going anywhere. You said that anyone who boasts about their power is hateful, and anyone who boasts about their money is contemptible. What else? Then he pointed at the male lead and said, this Dujun has both money and power. You should wake up. Then he turned to the male lead and said, Dujun, go back to your world. You should meet the only daughter of a wealthy family or date a celebrity. Hearing this, Min Young said, why is it so long? From the time I enrolled until now, I only met Dujun 3 times. What dating? His senior also said, that's true. There is no time and no opportunity. Dujun doesn't bother to go to school, and Min Young only goes to the library or the lecture hall. How can they date? The other guys heard this and just sat quietly and laughed. Dujun did not say anything but just thought to himself that he felt jealous of these guys. He was just an old uncle with a dry love spirit. Sometimes his male hormones would rise up, but the stress in his work had suppressed them. Then Min Young stood up and said, I met you already, so I'll go. Suddenly she turned back and said, oh Dujun, can you meet me for a moment? I have something to say. Dujun was surprised and did not know what this girl wanted from him. Min Young continued, I'm so embarrassed to die, but I still want to say this. You think carefully and answer me. Then they started to go outside and the wind blew coldly. Dujun said, it's so cold. What do you want to ask? Min Young said annoyedly, I want to ask something clearly. The male lead looked at her and thought, what do you want to clarify? Dujun saw that she was serious, so he also answered her seriously. Hey, it's freezing, but you're still acting cute and not saying anything. Then she spoke up, passing the judicial exam before graduating is my goal and duty. Dujun asked, I understand the goal, but what do you mean by duty? Min Young explained, my family are all lawyers. Moreover, almost everyone passed that exam before graduating from law school. If I don't pass before graduating, the whole family will scrutinize me, so I have to pass. Dujun sighed but still didn't understand. He smiled and asked, so what? Min Young continued, this exam is much harder than grade 12. Actually, I don't have much time left. Hearing her say that, Dujun still didn't understand what time she was talking about. Then suddenly, Min Young moved closer to Dujun, intending to use her beauty or something. Min Young looked straight into Dujun's face and said, the time to date you. Dujun didn't understand what she was talking about. Seeing that, Min Young said again, I'm confessing that I like you, and you only react like that? Dujun was surprised and asked back, I heard you don't like showing off your power and money, but you have both? Mi John was stubborn but he was very handsome. Oh my god, the male lead didn't know how to respond after hearing her say that. Mi Young said again, your reaction is only one kind. What do you mean by that? Then she saw Dujun clueless and didn't understand anything. Min Young sighed tiredly and said again, let's get back to the main point. I don't have time and you don't come to school often. Just decide like this. We will go out to eat together once or twice a month. We don't need to meet often. Dujun heard this and still didn't understand what decision he had to make. She suddenly said bluntly, decide on our dating. Dujun's grandfather also didn't understand what was going on, let alone this little kid who was hit by something. Then Dujun probably thought she was pretty, so he also smiled and asked, "Do you know my phone number yet?" He didn't know how she knew his phone number after only meeting 3 times. She was like a pervert. Dujun said again, "Call me and I'll send a car over." Min Young wondered, "What car?" Dujun answered, "A car to pick you up. Did you forget? I'm a 3rd-generation chaebol. Our date can't be ordinary. You just prepare yourself." She confessed without grace and also got accepted without grace, so she didn't understand anything either. Then Dujun turned around and went inside, leaving her standing outside in the cold alone. Mi Young hurriedly shouted, "Dujun! This is a secret. If anyone asks, just say I forgot to do the classification homework, so I asked you." Dujun also agreed casually. When Dujun entered the room without any interest in girls, they asked him what they were talking about. Dujun was answering according to the script Min Young wrote earlier. He hadn't finished his sentence when suddenly Min Young's grandmother opened the door again and stuck her head in. Then she shouted loudly, "I decided to date Dujun from today." The group of men who heard her say that were shocked by her boldness. Min Young ran away after saying that and closed the door with a bang. She left Dujun to face the hateful eyes of his friends who liked girls. The next day at a new building that no one knew who it belonged to yet but would find out soon enough. The old men in suits were evil inside, but outside they pretended to be polite and greeted each other. One of them reached out his hand and introduced himself happily to him. "I'm Lee Young Chio." Mr. Sehun also greeted back. "Thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule to meet me." Mr. Lee Young Chio replied, "Don't be so formal. You are the one who saved the Achin group from collapsing. And my niece is the one who should thank you." Dujun was standing on one side, silent and observing. He looked at Mr. Lee Young Chio with a bullet-like gaze, even though he had just met him for the first time. Then he remembered the conversation with the chairman.